Welcome to the Daily News Roundup for Sunday, January 19th, 2025. Lots to get to today, from a ceasefire in the Middle East to, well, some political shakeups here in the U.S. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. It feels like global events and U.S. politics are kind of colliding in some pretty unexpected ways today. Should be interesting.
Definitely. Okay, let's start with the Israel-Hamas conflict. After 15 months, a ceasefire finally took effect earlier today.
Yeah, this could be a major turning point in a conflict that's, caused so much suffering. But it all depends on this hostage release agreement. It's a pretty fragile situation.
And we saw those incredible scenes of the hostages being released, right? Yeah. Romy Gonen, Duran Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari. She's a British citizen. I can't even imagine what their families must be going through.
I know. The relief on their faces was it was powerful. But you could still see the trauma, It's going to be a long road to recovery.
Absolutely. So what happens now? Do you think this ceasefire will hold?
Well, that's the big question. There's a lot of mistrust between Israel and Hamas. The next 6 weeks are going to be crucial. They've agreed to release 33 hostages and 1,900 Palestinians. But like I said, it's fragile. Any little thing could set things off again.
And the devastation in Gaza is it's hard to comprehend. The UN is estimating 60% structural damage. Thousands of families are returning to, well, basically nothing.
It's just heartbreaking. 46,900 casualties in Gaza alone. Think about the trauma, the grief. Rebuilding is going to take years.
It's almost impossible to grasp. I read about this woman, Dua Al-Khalidi. She survived with her daughters, but her husband and other family members, well, they didn't make it. Their bodies are still under the rubble.
Yeah, that story really stayed with me too. And there's so many others like it. Like Hussein Atta, the weightlifter, he lost 10 family members, his home, his sports club, everything.
It's hard to imagine coming back from that.
It really is. It just shows you the true cost of war.
Yeah.
And, even if the ceasefire holds, the road to recovery is going to be so long.
Absolutely. And we're already seeing the political fallout. Several far-right ministers in Israel resigned over this deal.
Yeah, it shows how divisive this issue is, even within Israel. Those resignations could really weaken Netanyahu's government. It's going to be even harder to implement this agreement now.
Okay, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about U.S. politics. Former President Trump is back in the White House, and he's already promised some major shakeups.
It's certainly a dramatic return. He's talking about a blizzard of executive orders aiming to undo a lot of what Biden did.
Over 200 executive orders, apparently. Immigration, environmental regulations, diversity programs, even wants to ban transgender athletes. It's a lot to take in.
It is. That many executive orders all at once, it's unprecedented. It suggests he wants to completely reshape the government's agenda. The potential consequences are huge.
And one of the most interesting ones is this new DOGE department, the
Right.
Department of Government Efficiency. And he's put Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in charge.
That's right. It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? It shows how much influence tech entrepreneurs have these days. But it also makes you wonder about potential conflicts of interest. Do they even have the experience to run a government agency?
That's a good question. And a lot of people are skeptical about whether he can actually pull all this off. Executive orders can be challenged in court, and he's already facing opposition from Democrats and even some Republicans.
This is where the legal battles will start. We're definitely going to see lawsuits about a lot of these orders. It'll be up to the Supreme Court to decide, which could really change the balance of power in the government.
And I've heard there are already talks of lawsuits regarding mass deportations and those parties he promised for the January 6th rioters.
Yeah, those issues are incredibly divisive. They strike at the very heart of American democracy, It's possible his actions could polarize the country even further.
Well, it's certainly shaping up to be an interesting presidency.
To say the least. It'll be interesting to see what the next 4 years hold. The whole world will be watching. And speaking of things the whole world is watching, there's been a pretty surprising development with TikTok, remember? The app that was supposed to be banned in the U.S.
Yeah, I thought that was settled. The Supreme Court even upheld the ban. Something about security risks because of its ties to China, right?
Exactly. But it's back online now. Trump, he hasn't even officially taken office yet, but he promised to put the ban on hold. TikTok jumped on that immediately and started restoring service.
I saw they even released a statement thanking Trump. That's a bold move, considering how much opposition there is to TikTok, on both sides of the aisle.
It really shows you the power of the president, doesn't it? One promise, and he can basically override a Supreme Court ruling. Shows how tricky things are getting with international relations and all this technology stuff.
Well, some Republicans are furious. They think Trump's putting his own interests ahead of national security. They're calling it a betrayal.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Trump. He needs to keep his supporters happy. But this is a complicated issue with China. It's a balancing act.
And legally, is this even allowed? Can an executive order just undo a law, especially one the Supreme Court already ruled on?
This is going to end up in court again, you can bet on it. It's a huge deal for free speech, online privacy, the future of U.S.-China relations. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But for now, let's talk about those 3 hostages who were released by Hamas. Back to the ceasefire.
Right. Romy Gonen, Duran Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari. It's hard to even imagine what they went through.
I know. Romy, she was that dance student, right, captured at that music festival. She spent over a year in captivity, away from her family, her life just completely on hold. Now she's finally home. But the trauma, that doesn't just disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. And Duran, the veterinary nurse, taken from her apartment near Gaza. I read about that last WhatsApp message she sent her family. They caught me, she wrote. And you can hear gunshots in the background.
Awful. And Emily, the British citizen, she was shot too, I think. Lost a couple of fingers. It's hard to fathom what these women have endured.
It really is. Their strength is incredible.
Yeah.
But there is still more than 30 hostages that are supposed to be released over the next few weeks.
Right. We've got their names listed on our website if you want to learn more about them. Their families are praying for their safe return.
It's tragic, but, not all the families will get that happy ending. The remains of Staff Sergeant Oran Shol were recovered in Gaza. He was killed back in 2014, and Hamas had been holding his body ever since.
It just shows how deep the wounds of this conflict run. Even with this ceasefire, there's still so much pain and uncertainty. 2 other hostages are still being held, a soldier's remains, and 2 civilians.
Okay, well, switching gears a bit here. This next story might seem less dramatic, but it has some pretty big international implications. A fishing dispute between the UK and the EU.
Yeah, you might be surprised to hear this, but this could actually trigger a trade war.
It all comes down to this tiny fish, the sand deal. The UK banned fishing for them in the North Sea, and the EU is taking them to court over it.
Sand eels might seem insignificant, but they're crucial to the ecosystem there. They're, the bigger fish, the seabirds, even whales, they all depend on sand eels for food. The UK says protecting them is crucial for the entire North Sea.
That makes sense. But the EU's not buying it.
Well, they say it's unfair to the Danish fishermen who relied on sand eels for, animal feed and fish oil. They're calling it discriminatory and say it violates their post-Brexit trade agreement.
And here's where things get interesting. If the UK loses, they could face tariffs on all sorts of exports to the EU. So yeah, the stakes are high.
It's a real test of that post-Brexit relationship, the first big one. We'll have to wait and see how it unfolds. Who knew a tiny fish could cause such a big international incident, right?
It's wild. Okay, well, back in the U.S., there are protests underway and a pretty concerning situation unfolding in Colombia.
It's a reminder that even as we focus on the Middle East, other conflicts are brewing. Peace is fragile.
Yeah, so in Washington, D.C., thousands are marching in protest of Trump's inauguration. It's connected to that Women's March movement, but it's broader this time around.
It just highlights how divided the country is right now. A lot of people are really worried about Trump's policies and what they'll mean for, everything, really. Civil rights, social justice, a future of democracy.
I saw some interviews with protesters. Their concerns are all over the place. Climate change, the economy, racial justice. They're afraid things are going to get worse.
Trump is a polarizing figure. There's no doubt about it. Some see him as a strong leader, but a lot of people are afraid he's going to divide us even more.
And then there's Colombia. The drug war is heating up again. It's gotten really bad in the Catatumbo region. Clashes between the ELN rebels and I think it's factions of the FARC.
They're fighting over control of the cocaine trade. It's tragic. Peace agreements are one thing, but when there's that much money and power involved, it's hard to make them stick.
The impact on those communities is devastating. Dozens killed, community leaders kidnapped, families fleeing their homes. President Petro is calling it war crimes.
It's a reminder that building lasting peace is hard, especially in places with so much poverty and inequality. And then you add the drug trade into the mix. It's a story that doesn't always get the attention it deserves.
Now, over in South Korea, they have their own political crisis unfolding. Their impeached president, Yoon Suk-yeol, a court just extended his detention.
His supporters are outraged. I saw footage of them storming the courthouse, smashing windows and doors. It's a mess.
Yoon was arrested for trying to impose martial law. A lot of people saw that as a power grab.
And he's refusing to cooperate with the investigation. It just adds fuel to the fire. This whole thing could really destabilize South Korea. The effects could be felt throughout the region.
Welcome back to the Daily News Roundup. Before the break, we were talking about that political crisis in South Korea. Now to a shocking development in Iran.
2 senior judges were assassinated, Ali Rassini and Mohammad Moghisseh, right inside the Supreme Court. It's a really brazen attack. People are stunned.
I read the attacker just walked in and opened fire. Killed both judges, and then himself. They're still investigating the motive, but I guess both judges were pretty controversial.
Yeah, they were involved in all those crackdowns on dissidents. Moghisseh was even under sanctions, for human rights abuses. This could be a sign that the opposition is getting more aggressive.
It's a tense situation, that's for sure. Okay, well, this next story is a little different. Not violent, but definitely stirring up some controversy. Over in Peru, a statue's causing quite a commotion.
It's a statue of Francisco Pizarro. He was, the Spanish conquistador, the one who conquered the Incas and founded Lima. It was taken down 20 years ago, but now it's back. People are protesting, saying it's insensitive.
Well, Pizarro's he's a complicated figure. He's a huge part of Peru's history, but he's also a symbol of, well, colonialism and brutality.
It's a debate that's happening everywhere. How do we deal with our history? Do we erase the bad parts or confront them? There are no easy answers.
It's a tough one. Okay, well, back in the U.S., Trump's making headlines again. This time, it's cryptocurrency.
He just launched his own meme coin, called it Trump, of course. It's already gained a ton of value.
Meme coins are those, what are they, digital tokens, right? Based on jokes and stuff.
Yeah. They're incredibly volatile. It's basically all hype and speculation, no real value.
Sounds risky.
It is, both for Trump and anyone investing in his coin. Speaking of risky, did you hear about that ski lift accident in Spain?
Oh, yeah, that was scary. A chairlift collapsed at that Estun resort in the Pyrenees.
Something about a pulley failure. Several of the chairs just fell. A few people were hurt pretty badly.
Thankfully, no one was killed. But there are 2 young women in intensive care. They're investigating the resort to see what went wrong.
It's a good reminder to be careful out there, even when you're just having fun. Safety regulations are important.
On a lighter note, there's some good news in the music world.
Chappelle Roan is killing it. She's the first openly queer female pop star to hit it this big, I think.
She's not afraid to speak her mind either, calling out bad fans, criticizing the industry. I saw that clip of her cursing at a photographer on the red carpet.
Oh, yeah. She's great. She's showing everyone you can be successful and still stay true to yourself. It's inspiring.
It is. Okay, before we wrap things up, let's go back to that Israel-Hamas ceasefire for a minute. There's some new info about how the deal came together.
It was a long process, months of negotiations, lots of back and forth, mediators from Qatar, Egypt, the U.S. It almost fell apart at the last minute.
I read that Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, was pretty instrumental. He had a tough meeting with Netanyahu, really pushed him to accept the terms.
It just shows you, even when things seem impossible, diplomacy can work.
It gives you hope.
Yeah.
Okay, one last story. This one's about courage and dedication. Those medics working in Sudan, in Darfur, they're incredible.
The city of El Fasher has been under siege, and the only hospital left is under constant attack. The doctors and nurses there are risking their lives every day.
Performing surgeries by flashlight while bombs are going off, treating patients with barely any supplies. They're refusing to leave, even though it's incredibly dangerous.
It's a testament to the human spirit. These healthcare workers are heroes. They're committed to saving lives no matter what.
It's a powerful story, and a stark reminder of the costs of war. Well, that brings us to the end of the Daily News Roundup for Sunday, January 19th, 2025. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. From the Middle East to the U.S. to, well, everywhere in between. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but staying informed is so important.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from around the world. Stay curious, and we'll see you then.